Welcome to our coverage of the Noor Salman trial right here on clickorlando.com. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Matt Austin. A powerful and disturbing day in the Noor Salman trial. The jury, victims' families, and survivors shown the moments Omar Mateen opened fire inside Pulse nightclub. Let's get you right out to News 6 investigator Mike DeForest, who was in the courtroom for all this. And Mike, how did the courtroom and Ms. Salman react when the footage was shown?
I wasn't personally in the courtroom, but my colleague Nadia Yanis was, and she says she herself, sitting in the gallery, had a difficult time seeing the surveillance video on the screen, and likewise, so did many of the victims' families. Now, Noor Salman, on the other hand, she had the closest seat to the video screen where they were playing this, and during the playing of that video, Nadine said that what she could hear was Kleenexes being pulled out of the box, and that Noor Salman appeared to be dabbing away tears, and this was the video that showed her husband opening fire in the Pulse nightclub. Now, I was in an overflow courtroom, and I actually got a much better view of the actual surveillance video from the Pulse nightclub. We've posted on clickorlando.com my description of it, so I won't go into that right now, but I will say that I think what really stood out to me, Matt, was first of all, you see Omar Mateen come into the nightclub about a half hour beforehand, and he just hangs out at the bar, and you can see he's watching the people that he will later shoot at. He leaves. When he comes back the second time, he beelines right for the dance floor. You don't see him opening fire right away, but you do see patrons on the dance floor starting to fall. Once you can see him walking around the club, he's holding his rifle, and it was just so slow. He was very calm as he walked around, and you could tell at some points he was shooting straight ahead, and other times he was shooting down into the piles of bodies that were lying on the ground, presumably trying to take out anybody who may still be alive. So that's a very brief description. It was certainly troubling to watch, and I am curious to know what's going through the jurors' minds as this happened. We are joined by veteran criminal defense attorney Mark O'Mara. What impact do you think this had on the jury to see this surveillance video of the attack?
Well, it has enormous impact, and that was the intent of it. The government started by going in there and showing something that's going to stick with this jury throughout the entire trial. There is a level of relevance to it without question, and that is the argument is she aided and abetted a terrorist organization through her husband, and this is the terror that was being undertaken by him. So in that sense, they have to show it. But I do think that they've got to be very careful that there's a balance between showing that evidence of the event and going a bit too far. Because don't forget, the jurors are not supposed to rely on emotions. They're supposed to actually set their emotions aside. And it's a difficult balance for a jury to do, but I think the government needs to let this go now and get on to the point of the trial where they're actually showing the connection between Mateen and Salman.
And that is really what it feels like happened. It seemed like the first day and a half of this trial, we heard just little tastes of what happened in Pulse. We heard from two victims. We heard some audio recordings from inside. We heard some 911 calls from inside. And then today we saw the video. By this afternoon, they moved the focus from Omar Mateen to his wife, Noor Salman. And one of the witnesses who took the stand this morning was Lieutenant William Hall. He is a police officer with the Fort Pierce Police Department. Salman and Mateen lived in an apartment down in Fort Pierce, and he was the very first person to make contact with her while the nightclub standoff was still going underway. It was only about an hour after the shooting occurred that they identified Omar Mateen and sent this police officer to go try to interact with his wife, Noor Salman. And one of the notable things that he pointed out is he told Salman there's some agents who are up in Orlando who want to speak to you. And allegedly her first statement was, "Oh, are we going to Disney World?" And it was during opening statements yesterday, the prosecution pointed out that in about an hour and a half before the Pulse attack, it appeared that Omar Mateen was scouting Disney World.
Well, and again, this is one of the bricks that the prosecution has to use to build up their case. Few little things here and there, these individual circumstances that are going to build their case. So the idea that she knew about Walt Disney, or there's maybe some connection. Another one, that there may have been a statement by her about guns being used when maybe she knew or didn't know about it. All of these little things are what the government's going to try and put together to strengthen up their case, and that's one of them.
Now, this was a police officer. Again, he's just getting a call out of the blue saying, go find this woman for this case that's taking place in Orlando. But during cross-examination, Noor Salman's attorneys really started going after him. The first point being that this quote that she made about, "Are we going to Disney World?" This police officer admitted he did not write that down in his notes, and that it only came to him a few days later. Does that make an impact on the jury if something this big he didn't notate?
Well, the government did what they did, was to get that in the jurors' minds, and then the defense does what they do, which is to say, well, hold on a second here. If it was significant, and anything is significant, when at the time he's doing that investigation, that questioning of her, then they know what's going on in Orlando. So every nuance of what she says should be recorded, and yet it's not done. It is at the very least sloppy police work. And that could come back because, again, the burden is always on the government to prove up their case. And these little nuances that can be presented by the defense, these little questions, could at some point lead up to reasonable doubt.
Now, the issue of recording this interview came up in the next witness. A quick little description of him. FBI Special Agent Christopher Mayo. He works in the FBI office down in Miami and Fort Pierce area. And he was the first one to really ask some tough questions of Noor Salman. Tell me about your husband. When was the last time you saw him? She said that afternoon before, claimed that he had gone with his friend Nemo out to dinner, which in this FBI agent's mind thought, well, maybe that's a co-conspirator in this. So he was relaying that kind of information to the people here in Orlando. At one point, the FBI agent testified that he had mentioned that Omar Mateen was involved in an incident in Orlando, and she reportedly told him, oh, he's safe with guns. And the FBI agent said, well, I hadn't told her it was a shooting yet. I imagine one of those other bricks that sticks in their mind.
Another brick, absolutely. But then the other question is, as was done by the defense in their cross-examination, was could she have been told about a shooting by somebody else? Because obviously we know when the Fort Pierce officer talked to her, he was aware that there was a shooting going on, so it may well have come from that. This is another example, and I know we'll talk about it in a moment, another example why law enforcement should detail and keep every piece of information that they can, be it good notes, audio tape, or videotape, so that it's not open to such interpretation or misinterpretation down the road.
And let's just go ahead and get into that, because in cross-examination, defense attorney Charles Swift really hammered home the fact that there was no audio recordings, no video recordings, and this FBI agent admitted they actually had a room there at their Fort Pierce office where they brought Noor Salman. They had the recording equipment there, and in his words, he just didn't think to use it, to which the defense pointed out, earlier this morning, folks, you saw this surveillance video of the Pulse nightclub attack. You saw body cameras. The whole incident involving Pulse was caught on video, but these 10 hours with Noor Salman, no video.
Well, and the question is why? You cannot simply say, I forgot, because that's horribly poor police procedures. It just is. You have a person of interest, if not a suspect, and she's talking to you. I think law enforcement has an obligation to take down all the information as best they can, including a videotape and an audio tape. My frustration, and we've talked about it with other cases, and with this one, is that the FBI has this unspoken policy, but one that exists nonetheless, seemingly, that says they don't need to record it. They'll take down their notes, they'll take down a statement and have it maybe handwritten. But in today's day, in 2018, when everybody has a video camera in their pocket with a cell phone, it is now time to tell law enforcement that if they're going to use a statement from somebody and they have the availability of recording it, that they must.
Now, the defense has already hinted that they are going to try to suggest that Noor Salman was coerced into making these false confessions, and where that coercion reportedly would have occurred, according to the defense, was here at this FBI office where she was being questioned. And so during direct questioning today, through the questions from the prosecutor, they were able to really point out that she was not in custody, she was not in handcuffs, she had access to a bathroom, she had access to food, she had access to call family members, and they say she never asked to go anywhere. The one thing she kept saying is, I want to go home. And they said, well, you can't go home because we're waiting on a search warrant for your house. At one point, then, she finally conceded and signed an agreement to allow police to search her house, which earlier she had denied them permission. But throughout this, they're trying to show that this was a very open interview setting. But then the defense during cross-examination pointed out that to the FBI agent, you knew very early on in this that Omar Mateen had been killed in the gunfight with Orlando police, and you didn't tell her. Why?
Right.
And he didn't come up with a straight answer right away.
Well, there's really not. Obviously, law enforcement has their procedures they're allowed to do. They don't have to tell somebody that they're an active suspect at the time they're talking to her, as long as she's not in custody. And certainly if there's an event where you're talking to somebody as a person of interest and they're not in custody, Miranda doesn't apply, and maybe they'll argue that the videotaping doesn't apply. We're not talking just about the legalities of this, we're talking about the common sense. We all know today, and they knew that day, that Salman was a person of interest who had very significant information, potentially, about Mateen, and they wanted to document it. So the question just is, and the one he couldn't come up with an answer to, was why not have it so that a jury like this one, 2 years down the road, can actually look at the statement itself rather than rely on a summary of it or her handwriting.
And it was during a redirect questioning that the prosecution basically gave him permission to say we didn't tell her about the death because she would have been a grieving widow and may not have given us the answers we needed. Mark O'Mara, thank you again for joining us. We really appreciate your insight into this trial. There is no court tomorrow. The judge has been giving the attorneys and the jurors the day off on Friday, but we will continue to have coverage here on News 6. We'll send it back to you guys.
Mike DeForest live for us. Thank you. Our coverage of this trial continues online. To read what the jurors saw when court began this morning, head to clickorlando.com/Noor Salman trial. And don't forget to follow up to the minute details on twitter.com/News6 Pulse trial. Join us tomorrow morning for another discussion. Our coverage begins at 8:30 right here on clickorlando.com. Thanks for joining us. I'm Matt Austin.